Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker, Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
And a very good morning to you. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel as we gear up for PMQs Unpacked at midday. We will pause the action, as we always do, live from the House of Commons. Tim Shipman will be here to analyse the key exchanges between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. Then Lara Spirit will round up the best of the rest, all of the other questions. So she'll basically sit through the boring ones. So that we don't have to. So you can watch all of that on the Times Radio YouTube channel from midday. Lara Spirit is here. Lara, what do we expect?
Hello. I think that we will expect an interesting PMQs today. It's a difficult one for Rishi Sunak, given we had some quite tricky economic data this morning. You remember last week in PMQs, he was jubilant at the fact that there'd been some upgraded forecasts that actually signalled that potentially the economy was looking better than it was. I think he'll find it difficult to go on the same line as he did last week on that. So much pressure on that. And I think the second issue that we will see come up, whether or not it will dominate, I don't know, is Labour's opposition to the government's nutrient neutrality proposals. Yeah. Michael Gove already saying that this makes Labour the party of house blockers and not house builders. So I think it would be interesting to see what happens there too.
And this is the last one for 4 weeks, 5 weeks?
For conference recess.
Yeah. So it's only be about 2 weeks, so we better make the most of it.
We haven't seen Oliver Dowden in ages.
Says the nation. Lovely, Lara. Well, we'll see you later on. Lara Spirit will be here for the best of the rest. PMQs Unpacked is coming up at 12 o'clock. But now, it's time for this.
Everything about my museum was spectacular, including the price. $1. Now that may seem a bit steep, but it was worth it. Look at what I gave them.
Yeah, we're talking at museums. We spoke to the Tank Museum earlier, who are absolutely massive on YouTube. Don't switch off the Times Radio YouTube now. You can go and watch the Tank videos later. I've been asking for your tales of nice, small, obscure museums. I mentioned the Bakelite Museum, which I think was in Willerton in Somerset, but Lucy says the Bakelite Museum has moved to a temporary site on the Levels. It's a brilliant collection, and we've loved having a look around at the open days until they found a new location. So there we are. That's nice. Nigel Fletcher, off of Leader of the Oppositions, said, I might previously have said the Fan Museum in Greenwich, but as of last Friday, the Museum of Political Fiascos is my new favourite and definitely now needs to become a real thing. I also think I have a good claim to becoming a curator. Nigel, I couldn't think of a better person. Wes says the Natural History Museum at Tring, which, amongst other things, genuinely has a display of dressed fleas. And he sent me a picture of, fleas wearing a dress and a hat. And my wife has reminded me of the one at Loch Ness is funny because it's sort of local and a lot of papier-mâché. We also went to the Museum of World Records in the Vendée once. It was just like a big toothbrush. 87222, start your message with the word Times. If you want to get in touch, you can email me, matt@times.radio. And we'll do some more of those a bit later on. Now, though, it's that time of the morning, halfway point of the show.
Could you rustle up a bit more enthusiasm? Oh, it's that time of the morning. Just about halfway through the show. Oh, she's back in the studio.
You were out partying last night.
I think partying would be an extreme version.
You had your glad rags on.
I did have my glad rags on because I was
medias.
At the other end of the scale at an amazing museum in London, the Victoria and Albert, big favourite of mine. Because I was lucky enough to get a sneak preview of the Gabrielle Chanel retrospective that they've got on there, which is really, really phenomenal. But mostly because you suddenly realise that actually, it's something Anna Murphy and I talk about a lot on the programme, that fashion isn't just about, whether you've got to wear, I don't know, baggy jeans or tight jeans or, whatever tyranny there is at that moment in time. But it's also about at the times that we live in and how particularly women express themselves and how the world changes around them.
Yeah.
And with Chanel, I mean, the great thing that she did was she basically adopted menswear for women and allowed women for the first time, really, to wear clothes that they were comfortable in, that meant that they could participate in the world around them more, and all of those things made huge changes.
So, but it's also that thing of like what. Like the Margaret Thatcher thing. Did she basically have to become a man, dress like a man, talk like a man, in order to reassure people that she could do the job.
That was exactly who we were talking about. I was talking to one of the curators who was sitting next to me at the dinner they had last night, and he was saying, Margaret Thatcher is absolutely fascinating when it comes to that progression of fashion and how you use fashion as sort of, he said that he would draw, if he did an exhibition, he would draw parallels between Joan of Arc and Margaret Thatcher because both of them had armour, used for different reasons, but actually, very much, psychologically for the same purpose. So it was really interesting, and I'm going to talk to Justine Picardy, who's Chanel's biographer today, she had a very complicated life, abandoned at the age of 11, sent to live in a nunnery as an orphanage in a nunnery. There was the complicated history during the Second World War. I think a lot of it actually the result of misogyny and misunderstanding rather than actual sort of crimes against Le France that she committed. She had a relationship with a German spy. But, she was a survivor, and she'd had to battle through quite a lot to build that empire. It's a really interesting story. Anyway, I'm quite excited about talking about that today.
Yeah, nice.
As you can see. Yeah. And I got loaned some amazing Chanel costume jewellery last night.
I was looking at it.
Which I wore.
And did you lose it or did you give it back?
I actually managed to keep a hold of it for the whole evening. Got home,
all those
put it back in its little box.
Things.
Yeah, and my daughter was like, she had tears pouring down her face about it. She goes, "No, don't give it back, Mum. Please, keep it for when I can go somewhere and dress up."
I'm not an expert. Those earrings are quite dangly. Was there not a risk they were going to get all knotted up in your necklace?
Well, it's really kind of you to show that sort of attention to detail. Yeah. I did manage not to get them tangled. I did have to hold, because I haven't got the longest, most swan-like neck in the world. So I did have to hold my chin up for quite a lot of the evening. I looked like something wasn't smelling too good on my plate, I think.
You're just going and turning up your nose at people.
Just in my effort not to trip over my earrings, basically. There is a lot of news about today, though, isn't there, Matt? We're going to be talking about that as well. I've got the author of The Fight Club.
Oh, yes.
Who also inspired the film. He's going to be coming on.
He can't talk about it, can he? So...
He's going to be talking about a gory satire about a family of professional killers. That's his new book. That should be gory, which is why I'm balancing it with a bit of fashion.
Yeah.
We've got travel. We're going to be talking about whether we should or shouldn't be travelling to Morocco at the moment with Claire Irvin, who is, of course, the fashion travel director for The Times. And we're also going to be attempting to go on the ground in Libya and just looking into not only the horrific floods that have happened there, but also how that failed state is starting to cause considerable international worry again. And one of the reasons that people haven't been able to access any support is because you're not allowed into the country. And it's a country now run by warlords again. Didn't we go to Libya to sort everything out there?
Yeah, we did.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all sorted.
Bit like Afghanistan, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's all sorted.
Yeah.
And Iraq, that's very good.
Tick.
Yeah, tick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
So what's happening with you today? I don't want to make this all me.
Are you having your photos taken later?
Oh, why do you think I'm wearing a vaguely smart trouser suit? Yeah. I am. I was told to wear something pale, I think, which is why I'm wearing a sort of...
Well, that's why I've gone for the light grey jacket. That's all
yeah,
right,
but you've got a black shirt on.
Yeah, well, I thought it was good contrast.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, because we've got Lara Spirit still in the studio with us.
Just catching a lot of emails.
It's amazing, isn't it? Well, no wonder she has to, because she works about 17 times harder than any MP, as far as I can work out, who, as you just mentioned, are off on their holes again after question time today.
Yeah.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that they'd argue that they're not on their holidays.
Yeah, but they literally are next week, because it's so. In fact, there's no reason for them to be off next week. It's just an extra week off, and then it's the Lib Dem conference, and then it's the Tory Party conference, and then it's the Labour Party conference. But obviously, they only go to one of those.
Yeah. So why do they need
what
the
are
whole?
They doing the other?
Well, so that they can react. You need to be ready and primed to react. Did you hear Maria Caulfield reacting this morning on breakfast to an outcry led, I'm afraid to say, by yours truly, about the fact that this women's health survey isn't open to women over 55, and just basically passing the buck. She said, I wouldn't presume to tell the scientists who are running the survey. He said, but it's a government survey, for heaven's sakes. When are people going to take responsibility responsibility for their actions. I'd be far more respectful if someone went, you know what, made a bit of a mistake, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've got so many women writing to me who are still going through menopause in their late 50s, and as if that wasn't enough, you know, who basically have been through, you know, women over 60, women into their 70s and 80s can still recall what it was like to have babies, the sort of support they had, what it was like to have a career, and how that was impacted
Also,
by their
I just thought,
fertility
just
journey.
for like PR purposes, don't put it on there.
Yeah.
Even if you're going to put everyone's results in the bin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a bit daft too. Anyway, there we are. Mamie will be back moaning about all of that and much more besides.
I won't be moaning. I'm going to be celebrating
From 1
Gabrielle
o'clock.
Chanel.
Yes.
Funnily enough, as we walked in, one of my friends said to me, he said, did you know that she invented the tan?
The tan?
Did you know that? That she was the first person to basically go and sit in the sun, because it was very unfashionable to have a suntan until Gabrielle Chanel or Coco Chanel came along. She went, got tanned, came back to Paris, and the whole world went, oh, my goodness, you look better. And so a whole industry was born.
There
Hello,
we are.
Saint-Tropez.
There we are. Well, hopefully you feel like you've learned something there. Mariella will be back from 1 o'clock. Right, coming up, PMQs Unpacked in 15 minutes' time. We are live on the YouTube channel. Morning from Uckfield, long-time listener, first-time watcher. Hello, Claire. Stephen says, you've missed many golden moments, Claire. Zippy from Rainbow will probably never be topped. It's a good point. We had Zippy from Rainbow came and reviewed PMQs on the YouTube a few weeks ago. It's unbeatable content. Up next, we are going to find out about Family Fortunes voters. Who are they? And what they're worried about, and what role might they play in the next election. We'll do that next here on Times Radio.
Times Radio Breakfast with Asma Mir and Stig Abel.
The Times' letters editor and voice actor Uncle Andrew Riley gives us the best letters of the week. Kathleen Stock and Ian Wilson put their spin on the day's biggest stories.
And no doubt some frivolous ones too. And we'll try to work out what John Lewis sales tell us about the economy.
Tomorrow morning from 6 on Times Radio. Download the free Times Radio app and listen to us wherever you are.
This is how it feels to be on a Fred Olsen cruise, sailing somewhere exciting. And this is how it feels to be sailing there at the very best possible time. Because every journey has been carefully handcrafted. This is how it feels to book a cruise at fredolsencruises.com. The people with 175 years experience of making every single day count. Fred Olsen Cruise Lines, 175 years in every single day.
Oh, that looks good.
It's new, off the Subway series menu.
But you said menus are for yes men.
Well, I'd normally create my own, but this is a masterpiece.
Right.
Every now and then, two tasty foods combine to become even more delicious. Pizza, hot melted cheese sandwich, it defies labels.
If it defies labels, how am I meant to order one?
Oh, just ask for a Pizzaiola submelt.
That makes sense.
Try the irresistibly cheesy range of hot press sub melts, part of the new series menu. There's now 2 ways to Subway.
On digital radio, on the web, and via the Times Radio app. Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Yes, welcome to a very special edition of Family Fortunes Voters, where unlike the selfish Mondeo man or Worcester woman, voters of different ages look out for each other. And here to tell us all about it, let's meet the contestants. They've been doing a big study for the Nuffield Politics Research Centre in Oxford. Dr. Zach Grant, give us a wave.
Hi, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
And Professor Jane Green, give us a wave.
Hi.
Oh, you're both waving. You're both waving. You can see that on the YouTube channel. So this is really, really fascinating. It's always good to identify the groups of voters we should be looking at. Zach, you asked older voters, they're worried about the financial struggles of younger relatives. Let's find out if any of the 6,000 people you surveyed said yes.
Yeah, did. Well, you're quite right. They did. 17%, in fact, of all voters, we believe, are both over 40 and have struggling younger family members. So 17% of the electorate make up this group of family fortunes voters, if you will. And we think there should be more attention on this group in the next run up to the next election.
And the point, I suppose, Zach, that's really interesting about this is the idea that voters are entirely self-serving and self-centred, that it is possible for an older person who might be worried about their pension or their retirement or whatever to simultaneously and perhaps even put before themselves, if they're comfortable, the concerns of other people in different age groups.
Absolutely, that is exactly what we found. This age group, people over 60 with struggling relatives, they do care, of course, about their pension and things like that, but they also care a lot about improving access to affordable housing, improving access to childcare, and improving the supply of vocational and technical education in particular. That is exactly what we found.
Now, Jane, you asked the group if they would support more state investment in childcare, education and housing, and our survey said...
Exactly. So actually overall, so you might be surprised to know that actually overall there's a lot of support for vocational education and affordable housing and free childcare. So one of the key observations about this study is that the economic divides aren't nearly as great between the ages as is true for other issues such as Brexit, for example. But support is even higher for vocational education, affordable housing and free childcare amongst this group of voters who are both over 40 or indeed over 60 as well, and who have struggling family members, those younger family members who are really struggling financially. And we know that because of very significant intergenerational divides in terms of wealth and getting onto the property ladder and all of those other things, that there is a lot of concern for younger generations. A lot of those younger generations and family members are struggling, and these older voters see that.
And then how does this play out in politics then, Jane? You asked these older voters, they were more likely to back the Conservatives as a consequence, and the survey said...
Exactly. They're more likely to support the Labour Party. And so if you compare the vote intentions amongst all of the over 40s or the over 60s, and then compare that to those people who do have close relatives who are struggling financially, you see that support for the Labour Party is higher. So whilst overall there's an age divide between voting Conservatives and Labour, actually there's a statistical tie for the two parties if we're looking just at those voters who have struggling younger family members. And this was last year when we took this survey in August 2022, but it's very likely to be the same case now.
And then, Zach, you asked the under 40s if they thought, that everyone thinks their hopes of the next generation is going to do better than the last, but you asked the under 40s if they thought they'd have a better standard of living than their parents, and the survey said...
Yeah, I knew that buzzer sound was coming. That's correct. Yeah, a majority of people under 40 actually think they'll live a worse life. They'll have worse lifetime living standards than their parents. That's very different if you look at the group that are 60 plus. Nearly all of them believe they are having and will have a better life than their own parents. So what we're really seeing is this slowdown in intergenerational progress, with younger people being a lot more skeptical about their chances of improving upon a lot of their parents over time.
And so what should political parties do with this information? I mean, they presumably through their research and polling and focus groups, they might be picking up some of this, Jane. But what should be the sort of policy prescription? Is it about having a sort of sort of almost cradle to grave policy prescription, so that you're saying, instead of parceling off people and saying, oh, we're going to look after pensioners because they're more likely to vote for us, or oh, we're only going to do something on tuition fees because young people are likely to vote for us. Is there a sort of policy prescription that would particularly appeal to these family fortune voters?
Yeah, it's been interesting, hasn't it, when we think about the way we talk about British politics and the way when we talked about triple lock, lots of people in the last couple of days have been saying, well, these older voters vote and that's why the triple lock's there and that's why it's going to be sustained throughout the next election. But what we're really saying is that there's a number of implications, really. One is that you could gain votes by talking more about intergenerational solidarity, that it's not necessarily pitting one age group against another and saying, well, older voters will just want this. No. Older voters also want parties to care about their younger family members if they're struggling. In terms of policy support, then you see, 65% of the over 60s support more spending on vocational education, which would primarily benefit younger generations. Around 60% support more affordable housing, and almost a half support more spending on free childcare. So these things are popular. So it's kind of like a double benefit if you talk about younger generations and older generations. The flip side of that, it's a double penalty for the current government, because if you're struggling and you're older and the economy is not going very well and things are a little bit more difficult, that's not good for the Conservatives. But it's also bad for the Conservatives if those people have other members of their family who they see struggling too. So it's kind of double whammy if you get it wrong, double benefit if you get it right.
And Zach, it basically requires a bit more nuance, mounting an argument, laying out a case that if you are Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, you're faced with this issue of picking the pension triple lock that it's going to cost £9 billion if they stick to it. Actually, it sounds like you probably could mount an argument that means you don't shed all of your support amongst older voters, but you have to, there's a lot of explanation there rather than it being quite so transactional.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think what we find, we want to be clear that it's not that old people don't care about the triple lock. They do. It's just that they also have concern for services that also benefit younger members of their family. And incidentally, we also found that there's a large amount of support for the pensions triple lock among young adults. And why is this? Well, they also care about their parents and grandparents.
Yeah.
They want them to have a better quality of life. And they also often don't want to be looking after these people, their older relatives themselves. They have an interest in increasing support to the older generation as well.
So is this group, Jane, the Family Fortunes voters, are they going to decide the next election, or will there be a group that's ignored by the political parties?
I don't think political parties can afford to ignore a group that's 17% of the entire electorate. Now, this group, so we think about the 17%, let's benchmark that a bit. So this is the 17% who are over 40 and who have younger family members who are struggling financially. Now, that 17% is larger than the entire population. It's around double the size of the entire population of the Red Wall. And the Red Wall has been seen as the group that's going to decide the next election. So there's a bigger group than that group. And so I think it is important. And if we think about what's happened to this younger generation in that time. So last year, you might have been struggling financially, unable to buy a house. Perhaps you bought a house and now it's more unaffordable to have that house. Interest rates on mortgage payments have made that even more difficult. So it's likely, if anything, that this group might be even larger. And, if we think about one thing that's going to matter for the next election, the number one concern on people's minds is the economy.
Yeah.
And this is one feature of how the economy is going to play out, I think.
Yeah, and is it all a bit more complicated than someone likes to make out. Well, thank you very much for that. That is generally really fascinating. The Family Fortunes voters. Massive thanks to Dr. Zach Grant and Professor Jane Green, who carried out the report. They're both from the Nuffield Politics Research Centre at Oxford. Oh, it's like Saturday night, isn't it? Bit of Les Dennis on the telly. Fish and chips on your knee. Lovely. We'll have a theme tune like this at PMQs Unpacked every week. Yes, the PMQs Unpacked is coming. We are live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. If you are watching on the Times Radio YouTube channel, tell your friends, share it, post it on your Twitters, on your X's, on your... You can't post a link on Instagram, it's quite complicated. Put it on your Facebook. I know lots of our listeners are on Facebook about it. Let's put it on there. Hello from sunny Norfolk, says Martin. Andy says hi. Morning, Matt from a Brit living in Austria, which means I can get out to do the business and get back from Matt C programme at 11. Brilliant programme. Oh, we see because of the time difference. Right, fine. Hello from Barcelona, says Tim. Let us know where you're watching on the YouTube channel. And we'll bring you PMQs Unpacked in just a moment. Tim Shipman will be here to pause the action. Lara Spirit's going to watch the best of the rest. And then it's going to be it's a special one today because we expect lots of people in the House of Commons to be wearing sheaves of wheat because it's back British Farmers' Day. And we're going to speak to some farmers a bit later on in the show as well. And then we'll do the quiz. Can you get to number 10? If you want to come on and play the quiz, can you get to number 10? Email me with your name and number, matt@times.radio. Tim Shipman is here, Sunday Times chief political commentator. How are you?
Very good.
You're not wearing a sheaf of wheat?
No, all my headphones, but I'll put them on now.
You can put them on if you want to.
Now, I do my bit for British farming by consuming a vast array of pastry products, Scotch eggs, sausages, pasties, all the good stuff.
All the good stuff. Do you like
No, don't ask.
I don't think Lara Spirit looks like she's...
No, she's not doing
consumed
enough.
many pasties in her life.
She's not doing
to be
enough
honest.
to support British farmers. It's importing
Well, unless
those
it's
posh
the quinoa
beans.
farmers.
But there is a new bean called a Carlin bean. I
Right.
was telling Andrew this just
Yeah.
outside, which is actually a British bean.
A British bean.
A British bean.
Backing
British
British
So that's
beans.
British speaking farmers. Thank you so much.
Right, very good. I think Tim and I probably prefer the beans in a tin. Right, get on your YouTube channel. We are live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. We're live on Times Radio. PMQs Unpacked. We'll pause the action during the key exchanges between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. It's the last one for several weeks because we're off to party conferences. Hurrah! We'll do that next, right here on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley, and this is Times Radio. In a moment, PMQs Unpacked, live on Times Radio and the Times Radio YouTube channel. But first, a look at the headlines this lunchtime. Ofgem is banning the forced installation of prepayment meters in certain homes, including over 75s, with no support, and homes with children under 2. Energy companies have previously been criticised for using court orders to change people's meters without their consent. They weren't keeping up with payments. The Kremlin says talks with Kim Jong-un were important and substantial. North Korea's leader has now left Russia, having said that Putin is protecting his sovereignty and security interests. 30,000 people are thought to have been displaced by floods in Libya. A minister has said 5,300 bodies have been recovered in the east, with the number of fatalities expected to rise significantly. A 60-year-old man has been arrested after an 11-year-old girl was injured by an American XL bully crossbreed in Birmingham. West Midlands police say he is being held on suspicion of possessing a dog dangerously out of control. And the by-election in Tamworth will take place on the 19th of October. It was held by Conservative MP Chris Pincher, who failed to overturn his suspension from the House of Commons over allegations of groping. And we'll have more news in an hour. But now, live on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yes, Tim Shipman, the Sunday Times chief political commentator, is here.
Hello, Matthew.
You returned from your summer break. You're here for 2 weeks, and then we've got another break coming up.
Well, it's not a break, though, is it? It's more of a sort of punishment escapade where we go and listen to politicians.
So there was a 4-week party conference recess.
Yeah, and there's only really
4
weeks of...
Well, there's nothing on next week.
No.
And then we've got the Lib Dem conference, which finishes on the Tuesday.
Some of us may or may not be going to that.
Well, we're going because we're off to Bournemouth because the sun's going to be out. They've got a good crazy. They've got a good crazy golf course. And then the following week is the Conservative Party conference.
Yes.
Lasts till Wednesday. And then the Labour Party conference technically lasts till Wednesday. But
and for the geeks, this is very exciting because the order has switched.
I know.
For the first time in a very long time.
Which is because of a booking mishap?
I believe so.
The venue in Liverpool wasn't available.
But it is normally the case that the Prime Minister, who obviously has the power to sort of set the agenda a little bit more than the Leader of the Opposition, normally gets to go last.
Yeah.
And however good a conference the Opposition has, that it's still sort of on the racket for the Prime Minister. And that won't be the case this time. And that may sort of slightly subconsciously reinforce the idea that, you know, Labour is the more interesting of the two conferences.
I suppose the flip side is that I assume we'll get lots of government announcements at the conference, and actually the question then to Labour is like, well, what are you going to do about that? What's your plan? They're actually hiding we had John Healey on the show earlier in the week and asking him about defence, and he said the army was too small and he'd stop the cuts. So, okay, how big should it be? I'm not going to get into that now. How would you pay for it? Well, there's still to come. And you do wonder whether that line is going to be very hard to hold when you've got dozens, hundreds of journalists from around the world turning up and asking the question, what are you going to do and how are you going to pay for it?
Yes, and that's the challenge for them, isn't it? But equally, looking like a government in waiting can often involve looking like you're not going to tell anybody anything.
Yeah.
Which is good practice for being in government as well.
Well, we'll see how all that pans out. Lots of you saying hello on the YouTube channel. Hello from Farnham in Surrey. That's not far from me. Good afternoon from the sofa. Hello from Derbyshire, said David. Hello from Cardiff. Hello from Norway. Phil says, I'm only here because I saw the retweet from Kate McCann. Thank you, Kate McCann, for doing that. Somebody's in Tamworth. Now, it's interesting. The Tories have chosen a new candidate in Tamworth, haven't they? Because they had a slight problem.
They had another issue with their, it was one of those. Chris Pincher, who was effectively driven out under Boris Johnson for allegedly misbehaving in the Carlton Club in the evenings. So yes, it's going to be another by-election with what ought to be a stonking great Tory majority that won't be, because the incumbent has been driven out in disgrace, and this is not a government that's doing terribly well in by-elections at the best of times.
So I think we can go to... Can we go live to the House of Commons now? Yeah? OK, here we go. Then this is question number 1 then. The last one for several weeks. This is Keir Starmer. Oh, we don't have Keir Starmer. We don't have Keir Starmer yet. I don't know what he's doing. Keir Starmer is wearing his sheaf of wheat. It is Back British Farmers Day. And he's wearing a sheaf of wheat.
They're not subtle, these sheaves of wheat,
it doesn't look like Rishi Sunak is wearing his sheaf of wheat.
Oh.
Or indeed anyone on the government bench, I don't think.
I wonder what the North Yorkshire farmers would make of that. To be honest, if Rishi Sunak wore a sheaf of wheat the same size as Keir Starmer's, it would probably...
might knock him over.
Yeah, it'd be leaning to the side, at least.
No, just looking on the Tory benches, there's Suella Braverman's now on the front bench. Secretary, she's not got one. Alistair Jack's not got one. Alex Chalk's not got one. Oh, it's going to be a fun game, isn't it? Do join us on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Who's wearing a sheaf of wheat? Let's go live to the House of Commons. It's Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his words about the Clerk of the House? Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to the police who tracked down the escaped terror suspect from Wandsworth Prison last week. Despite being charged with terrorism and despite being a flight risk, he was not held in a Category A prison. Why not?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the police and their partners for their efforts to find and arrest Daniel Khalif. There is now an ongoing legal process that must be allowed to take its course. But I'd like to reassure the public that while these cases are extremely rare, the Justice Secretary has launched an internal investigation about how this could happen, as well as an independent investigation of the incident, so that we can learn the lessons from this case and make sure that it never happens again.
Yes. An interesting decision to go on this, given it is now very much a live criminal case, as Rishi Sunak
pointed out. Yes,
pointing out.
And Starmer has some experience of understanding the perils of
prejudicing he was a former director of public prosecutions.
Yes, but one wonders now then if there's going to be a bit of a sort of security theme. Are we going to hear about spies as well as the day goes on? Terror suspects. Ben Wallace was the former Defence Secretary on the front page of, I think, the Telegraph this morning, wasn't he, saying the European Convention on Human Rights is stopping us tackling terrorists. I don't know if that's got anything to do with this. I suspect it probably hasn't. It's probably more cock-up.
Yeah.
But
it also depends. I mean, I wouldn't have said there's a huge political advantage from rightly or wrongly, because it does sound like it's a nightmare in prisons, but the general public normally don't mind what's going on in prisons. But whether or not he can wrap this into a broader argument about nothing working.
Well, I suspect it will be that, and just the government kind of just cock-up after cock-up, I suspect, is where we'll be going.
That's
and for those who were
with the title of the podcast sorted.
For those who were with us last week, whoever is holding Suella Braverman's string is again nodding her head most vigorously.
Yes, so somebody pointed out that it looks like someone pulls a string at random points, which makes Suella Braverman nod, sort of basically unrelated to what's being said. Well, let's go back to the House of Commons then. Is Keir Starmer going to stick with prisons, or will he go elsewhere? It's question number 2.
The truth is they're presiding over mayhem in the criminal justice system. Only a few short months ago, Zara Alina's family said ministers had, and this is their words, blood on their hands after probation failures that led to her murder. So it beggars belief that we're back here once again. The Chief Inspector of Prisons said conditions in Wandsworth are so bad it should be shut down. The Chancellor is telling anyone who'll listen that he raised concerns months ago. Probation, school buildings, now prisons. Why does the Prime Minister keep ignoring the warnings until it's too late?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman with his background should know better that because of the wide variety, because of the wide variety and considerable difference in severity of people charged under that Act, it is not and has never been the policy that they are all held in Category A prisons, something that I shouldn't need me to point out to him given his experience. But he talked about resourcing. I am happy to tell him that over the last few years, we have delivered an extra 4,000 new prison officers. Staffing levels at Wandsworth in particular are up by 25% in the past 6 years. And because we're boosting prison pay, we're also improving retention and at the same time investing £100 million to improve prison security with new measures like X-ray body scanners. But if he wanted to have a truly honest debate about this, perhaps he'd acknowledge that prison escapes under the Labour government were almost 10 times higher than under the Conservative.
Right, so
I'll see your politics and I'll give you some facts.
I'll give you, yeah. So Keir Starmer sort of hinting at that. He talked about probation and then school buildings, and now he's on to prisons and the general sense that people who've warned these services are struggling, they need more money, and that Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, didn't give them more money. And now we are seeing the consequences of that.
He also claimed Jeremy Hunt had said they need more money. Jeremy Hunt looked slightly perplexed by that. He was shaking his head and going, what are you on about?
I thought Jeremy Hunt did say that he'd raised concerns about Wandsworth. I think he said he had a constituent. He said he raised the alarm over extremely worrying conditions and staff problems at Wandsworth months before.
That's what that will be about.
Yeah. He passed a detailed set of allegations about the state of the prison and lax standard staff to Wandsworth governor. After failing to get a reply, the allegations made by a constituent, there we are, I was on remand there for 8 months. After failing to get a reply to his submission, he escalated it to the then Prisons Minister, Damien Hines, and the Prison Service headquarters in June, but only finally received a response last month. So I think that came out a couple of days ago.
I think the other significant thing here, though, is that Starmer's now trying to run an argument against Sunak that he gets all these warnings and he takes an age to do anything. So Starmer's done quite well at saying Sunak's out of touch and doesn't do the right things. He's now trying to run an argument that because he's so in the weeds and studies everything for inordinate lengths of time, that he doesn't act on it. And I think there was a report in one of the papers this morning that on the alleged spy in Parliament, that Sunak was told about that back in the spring and then continued to do his kind of rapprochement stuff with China. So I wonder whether we're going to hear about that sometime
There's
soon.
also the argument that Sunak tries to mount in response is everything is totally fine and has been and is better than it was under Labour. And but that's also why we're spending more money on stepping up security.
Yes, it's sort of security's so good that it requires another £100 million and another 4,000 prison officers.
Yeah. Which again is quite a hard sell.
I mean, if we're having an honest debate about politics, you could say if Labour get in next time, a year into a Labour government, lots of people are going to discover that it wasn't just the wicked Tories. Yeah. A lot of this is quite complicated. There isn't much money, and you do have to make choices and priorities. But right now, this is a political game, and for the most part, there's quite a lot for Starmer to go at. Though I thought Sunak probably, that was a pretty robust response. And the line about escapes being 10 times higher was very well received by the people behind him. So, he's holding his own.
Some decent research at this point, done by Number 10.
But as ever, in 6 questions, it's quite easy for the leader of the opposition to slot a couple into the goal.
Yeah. And to try out some of the arguments, I suspect we will hear a lot of at those party conferences. Let's go back to the House of Commons now, though. This is question number 3 from Keir Starmer. Oh, no, it's Lindsay Hoyle.
And it will continue this week. Who wants to start this session by leaving? Please do so. I'm happy to help you on your way. Keir Starmer.
Big sheaf of wheat
every week, whatever the topic, he paints this picture as if everything is great and fine out there. It's so at odds with the lived experience in the real world. Let me turn to another serious security concern. some in this House face sanction, intimidation and threats from the Chinese state. When I asked the Prime Minister on Monday whether the Foreign Secretary raised the specific issue of the alleged spy arrested in March when he visited China a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister would only say that he raised that type of activity, but avoided specifics. So I asked the Prime Minister again, did the Foreign Secretary raise this specific case when he visited China? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I'll refer to my previous answer, where I've said very clearly that the Foreign Secretary raised these issues with the Chinese Foreign Minister who he met, as did I when I had my meeting with Premier Li over the weekend. But when it comes to China, Mr. Speaker, this government has put in place the most robust policy that has existed ever in our country's foreign policy. It is to protect our country for the values and the interests that we stand up for. It is to align our approach with our closest allies, including those in the G7 and the Five Eyes, and is to engage where it makes sense, either to advance our interests or, as I did at the weekend, to raise our very significant concerns. That is the right approach to China. It is one that is welcomed by each and every single one of our allies, and I'd be interested to know what he thinks that he would do differently.
So moving on to China. I mean, again, Sunak saying the most robust policy that's ever existed.
Look, is it robust in the sense that they've thought about it and calibrated a position and written it down? Yes. Is it robust in terms of being tough? I don't think it's as tough as Liz Truss was running when she was, however briefly, our Prime Minister, or even the bog end of the Boris Johnson regime. And the Conservative Party has veered between the sort of George Osborne approach of we need to be friends and make lots of money doing business with them, and a more sort of pious view about human rights and all the rest of it. But the problem you've got here is that, if this chap has done what he is thought to have done, then, that heats at the very heart of the sort of democratic process. And that is kind of a big deal. And Sunak's quite good at sort of saying it's more important to sort of, and saying it's the most robust thing ever. I remember...
given that ministers openly on the radio often can't explain, is China a threat? Is it a challenge? They get in a muddle. I think Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, did it the weekend.
Yeah.
They're actually, and it is nuanced
They
and complicated.
basically say it's, they are a commercial rival and a security threat, but they're not an enemy in the way that Russia behaves.
Russia, yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's the distinction they try to run. And the bottom line is the Russian economy is about the size of, the economy of London.
And China
and China is many times the size of ours, well, it's not many times the size, but it is bigger than ours, and it's getting bigger. And, people talk about the Chinese century. Not having a view about China is not an option, whereas with Russia you can sort of cauterise it and see them as a sort of largely negative force.
And be confident, with the exception, obviously, of North Korea today. Most of the countries are going to follow suit on that.
Yeah, I did enjoy that, though. The idea of Putin drawing on, Kim as a sort of character witness, I found deeply amusing.
I'm not sure that necessarily plays around the world. We are going to deduct points from Keir Starmer because he has used the phrase lived experience again. He did it last week. I just do not think the Prime Minister gets how it's all fine out there. Is at odds with the lived experience of millions of people. June the 21st, I'm sure that from the vantage point of his helicopter, everything might look fine, but that is not the lived experience of those on the ground.
It's a phrase that tells us something important, but it... one would have thought Starmer's aides would have found a more sort of straightforward way of saying that.
Yeah.
It's not how people talk in the Dog and Duck.
No, it's how people talk on Twitter about identifying as a vegan. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons now. This is question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
Well, that certainly wasn't a yes. And what he says now is totally at odds with the Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee report of July this year. That set out that the government has no clear strategy when it comes to China, has failed to support the intelligence agencies, and is leaving the UK severely handicapped in managing our future security. This has been raised time and time again. But yet again, the Prime Minister fails to heed the warnings and is now desperately playing catch-up. So will he finally commit to the full audit of UK-China relations, which so many in this House have so long demanded?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as always, the Leader of the Opposition is just playing catch-up and hasn't caught up with the reality of what's actually happening. He talks about the ISC report. Again, if he actually went through it, he would realise that it related to a period of investigations which was in 2019 and 2020. Since then, Mr. Speaker, we have launched a whole new integrated review refresh of our China strategy. It's published. We've put in place a range of new measures, including, for example, the National Security Protective Agency, which is staffed out of MI5, supporting businesses and organisations and being alert to the risk from cyber and from China. But if he wants to talk about foreign policy, Mr. Speaker, he should perhaps reflect on his own record, because this was the man who said he was 100% behind the former Labour leader, a person who wanted to abolish the army, scrap Trident and withdraw from NATO. It's clear what he did. He put his own political interests ahead of Britain's.
I'll get a little ring of the bell there for Jeremy Corbyn throwback.
True, but on this subject, I think he's got a point.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, on two things, people who like Keir Starmer, but remember those times, are prepared to be quite critical of him. One, that he didn't do nearly enough on anti-Semitism when Jeremy Corbyn was allowing that to run through the Labour Party. And the second is that, Corbyn is the most out there leader that we've had in pushing a century in terms of foreign policy. He fundamentally, sided with a lot of overseas nations against his own. And Starmer, again, was happy to prop him up. So on this, I think it's more legitimate than on a lot of the stuff that where the Tories throw that at them. But that was all quite substantive, wasn't it? Quite how sexy it is for the public. I mean, the previous answer, Sunak was talking about, this robust policy. Well, now, it's the integrated review refresh.
Refresh.
Which is what I was referring to. I should have spelt that out as well. But it... there's not people sitting around going, well, it's wonderful that you've got this.
But then it's interesting, Keir Starmer talking about, and I know he's asked about this before, a few months ago, a full audit of UK-China relations. And, whether it is people who are working in Parliament, whether it's, you were talking about this on the show earlier, universities and the way that they're entangled in both the number of Chinese students and the fact that universities rely on them for money, but also research as well.
Well, and the other question is that British, public schools, which if they do lose their charitable status under Labour, it would probably be only Russians and Chinese that can afford to go to them.
And then you end up even more entangled. And then you say, well, we can't do anything because of the economic dependency.
I mean, a cynic would say that, a full audit is a very good way of not bothering to have a policy for 2 years while you allow the audit to unfold. These are complicated questions that do not lend themselves to punchy questions and glib answers. I would be interested to know what Labour's policy is on China, and I'll be honest, I'm none the wiser as a result of these exchanges.
It's a full audit in addition to the integrated review refresh. Come on, Tim, pay attention. Let's go back to the House of Commons now. This is Keir Starmer, question number 5.
Probation, prison, schools, China. Yet again, inaction man fails to heed the warning and then blames everyone else for the consequences. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, the Home Secretary celebrated her first anniversary in post. That is, if you overlook the 6 days she missed when she was deemed a national security risk. In that year, 40,000 people have crossed the Channel on a small boat, and the taxpayer is now spending £6 million a day on hotel bills. He's failing to stop terrorists strolling out of prison, failing to guard Britain against hostile actors. He's completely failing to stop the boats. How can anyone trust him to protect the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about trust. He talks about action. Just today, this government is taking action to reform defective EU laws to unlock over 100,000 homes, boosting our economy, supporting jobs and ensuring that we can realise the aspirations of homeowners. Now, he talks about trust, he tried in this House to talk the talk on house building, but at the first sign of a cheap political hit. What did he do? He's caved in, Mr. Speaker. Rather than make the right long-term decisions for the country, he's taken the easy way out. It is typical of the principles-free, conviction-free type of leadership that he offers. Flip-flopping from being a builder to a blocker. Mr. Speaker, the British public can't trust a word he says.
Wow. So, so Keir Starmer trying to tie it all together on probation, prisons, schools, China. How can anyone trust him to protect the country? And I suspect this is born out of, and we've heard it a little bit in some of the focus groups as well, that one of the strengths that Rishi Sunak does have is, with some voters at least, or a bit of purchase, is sort of boring technocrat.
Yeah.
Possibly doing the right thing because he could be off earning money elsewhere if he didn't, if he wasn't doing this.
Yeah, and this is going to be his big argument at the general election, that, I'm making decisions for the long term, even if I don't benefit from them politically, I'm doing the right thing for the country. That's going to be his big argument. The flip side of that is that it takes him a long time to do things, and they don't always bear immediate fruit. And I thought Inaction Man's
quite good.
Well, it got a laugh and a sort of nervous tittery, quite a sort of, oh, that's good. There was a sort of, I'd be very surprised if we don't hear quite a lot of
lot of Inaction Man.
Yeah.
Oh, God, it's going to be the thing they all repeat at party conference, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like it's the first time.
Every single speech will have a shadow minister explaining why he's failed.
Because he mentioned Jeremy Corbyn earlier. There was a year when every single Tory minister mentioned Venezuela, made a joke about and being Caracas. And there was quite a lot of hoops that you had to jump through to get from Jeremy Corbyn to Caracas. But anyway.
And then Sunak's response,
yes,
which was he didn't even bother to, no pretense of answering that question. He hit him with this stuff which we talked about a couple of weeks ago about
nutrient
neutrality and how that makes it very, very difficult to build homes, and the government's changed on it. And Sunak's right. Starmer did bring this up quite a lot. We had 2 or 3 sessions on housing, didn't we? And, that will be their argument. You give them a chance to support something sensible and they don't do it. The response to that would be, well, we're the opposition and, we're not here to make your life easy.
And actually, it's long been one of those things that you get the sense that the government doesn't seem sufficiently gripped by the salience of the rivers issue. All the Lib Dems seem to talk about is sewage and rivers because it clearly
I've got
has
a friend on a WhatsApp group who you know well, who never shuts up about it. It's poop in the rivers, poop in the seas. It's like the centre of his life.
Well, because it's really easy to understand.
Yes, it is.
It's dirty. It's a powerful image.
Quite. And if you want to say the country's gone to SHIT.
Well, there it is.
There we go.
And
it's
so the idea that
the
the government, the idea that Rishi Sunak thinks the right policy to pursue right now is one that leads to more stuff ending up in rivers. Whatever the arguments in favour of house building, that's a hard sell.
It's a hard sell, but it's also it's one of those decisions that, if you're serious about trying to get things done, maybe there's an argument for it.
Yeah.
And this is politics. It's all about trade-offs. And what it is then about, if you're the person making those decisions, is explaining them clearly, rather than using them as a punchline in PMQs, where most people listening who aren't having the benefit of pausing and having, listening to us too, who has a clue what he's talking about? They're just sitting there thinking, well, he's not answering the question. I mean, the point he's making is sort of interesting and legitimate, but it's not very good politics the way, he could have been a little bit more explicit about it.
Well, let's go back and find out. So we've had Inaction Man. We're yet to have a captain hindsight.
Does he have a better line than Inaction Man?
Let's find out. Let's go back to the House of Commons. This is question number 6 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, every week he comes here protesting that nothing's his fault, trying to convince anyone who's still listening that everything is great. The truth is, the floor fell in for millions of families because of their economic mayhem. The classroom ceilings collapsed because he cut vital school budgets. And now the walls of our national security have been breached because they've ignored repeated warnings. No one voted for these shambles. No one voted for him. So how much more damage do the British public have to put up with before he finally finds the stomach to give them a say?
Mr. Speaker, we are getting on for the British public just in the last week, announcing a new landmark deal for British scientists, attracting £600 million of new investment for our world-leading auto industry, and wages now rising at the fastest rate on record, Mr. Speaker. And where has he been this week? Locked away with Labour's union paymasters, promising to give them more power and scrap the laws that protect British families and their access to public services. It's clear it's only the Conservatives that are on the side of the hard-working British public.
Oh, no Captain Hindsight.
No, there was quite a bit of,
knockabout.
Now,
there was a phrase that...
I did find myself switching
off. Well, I was about to say, Keir Starmer used the phrase, anyone's still listening.
Yeah.
And
we're here. We're here, Keir.
We are, don't worry, we're here still. But still listening to Rishi Sunak. And that's definitely something that's come up in some of the polling and some of the focus groups that we've done. Is that there was a poll this week in the Times that you go saying that more than half of voters would never consider voting Conservative. There's a risk that it doesn't matter how much Rishi Sunak goes on about boasting that he's rejoined Horizon, that we only left because of the Brexit that he advocated. People aren't listening anymore, and that is a real concern in number 10.
Totally.
That the shutters have come down. But they're not really listening to Keir Starmer either, I think it has to be said. But
look, politics is very changeable. Anyone who's covered the last 6-7 years of British politics knows that what seems to be the case now may not be the case in 6 months' time.
Yeah.
I've spoken to Tories who say, well, the kind of stuff that Joe Biden was talking about before the last presidential election, by the time he got to the election, it all completely disappeared. But it does, those of us that have been around a little while, and you kind of think you get a feel for things. And it felt like, the bog end of Boris Johnson and the Truss episode was a total disaster for the Conservatives and put a lot of people off completely the end. People then wanted to listen to Rishi Sunak. They thought he looks like a serious bloke. He's getting his head down. He's grinding away. We'll see whether he's making a success of it. And to a degree, he hopes to be judged ultimately by whether he can tick the boxes that he claimed he was going to tick. And those are still very much a work in progress. But there's a slight sense that in the kind of middle of this year that people began to take the view that he wasn't really cutting through. He wasn't terribly exciting. The guy, is all very well being a boring technocrat, but if you're not getting the job done and everything still seems to be rubbish. And there's just a sort of sense that the worm has turned and that, the desire for change, you talk to Tories, they acknowledge that. The only way they can sort of say that they might have a chance is by saying they'll make him the change. Yeah. And he's going to stand up, we're told, at conference and make a whole series of promises about how he will be different from other politicians. And, that's part of the argument we've been talking about, that, he will do everything for the long term. He's not in it for himself, blah, 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 blah. But it's a heck of a thing to take a change agenda after 13 years from an opposition which is riding high. And the interesting thing about Starmer, which I'm planning to explore in a piece quite soon, is that this is a guy who hated politics. He didn't really like it, found it all quite trivial. He's got quite good at it. Yeah. Now, it's not all his own doing. He's hired some good people,
but that's the art. The main skill of being a leader is having some good people around you.
So it feels a bit like Sunak is really pushing water uphill right now.
Yeah. We were discussing at the beginning about how we're about to have a break for the conference recess. Andy says on the YouTube channel, in retrospect, a month free of this nonsense would be welcome. Well, thank you for that, Andy.
No, don't worry, we'll be going off to witness other nonsense.
Yeah, we'll have plenty of other nonsense for you. Don't worry about that. Right, coming up, Lara Spirit's been watching the best of the rest so that you don't have to. In particular, will Rishi Sunak recommit to the triple lock, the pensions triple lock? We'll find out next on Times Radio.
Times Radio with Matt Chorley. Mariella Frostrup on Times Radio.
Best-selling author of Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk, joins us to tell us about his latest novel, Not Forever, But For Now, a gory satire about a family of professional killers. Gabrielle Chanel remains fashion's most famous figure. Her biographer, Justine Picardy, will tell me all about the designer, and we're on the ground in Germany to ask how Olaf Scholz crushed the economy and turned the country into the sick man of Europe. All that, plus the latest news, views, and analysis.
This afternoon from 1 on Times Radio.
At Kia, we're taking the lead in electrification with our Kia Electric Experience, showcasing the all-electric 7-seater SUV, the new Kia EV9. Be one of the first to experience it during this exclusive VIP unveiling. Voted the most anticipated new model of 2023 by What Car Readers, the Kia EV9 is set to change the way we move. Take the lead, drive electric. Search Kia EV9 Electric Experience today.
Kia, movement that inspires.
This is how it feels to be on a Fred Olsen cruise, sailing somewhere exciting. And this is how it feels to be sailing there at the very best possible time. Because every journey has been carefully handcrafted. This is how it feels to book a cruise at fredolsencruises.com. The people with 175 years experience of making every single day count. Fred Olsen Cruise Lines, 175 years in every single day.
Get a first look at tomorrow morning's front pages. Tonight from 10 with Carol Walker on Times Radio. Times Radio with Matt Chorley.
A very good afternoon. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel, where everybody's been watching us eat a little bit of Toblerone.
Beautiful British product. Well done, the British farmers.
Well done, the British farmers of Switzerland.
I'm happy to staple that to my shirt, if you like.
It was delicious. Yeah, Alice Thompson bought it in earlier because she went on holiday, so she bought us a big Toblerone, so there we are. Lovely. That's the sort of content you're missing if you're not watching along on the YouTube channel. Lara Spirit's here.
Hello.
Redbox editor. You've been watching the best of the rest so that we don't have to. Overall, the mood?
MPs are pretty lively, I would say, but very surprising, I think, to see it really dominated by the pensions triple lock. A number of questions to this effect from a number of people who thought it was in their interest to ask it, and I'm not necessarily sure that it was. But I'll fly to one first, which is, as I always do, Stephen Flynn.
Yes!
We'll listen to both. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Such unique enthusiasm. This is him asking about the state pension. It's very interesting. He focuses both of his questions on it, and I think, given the news today, it's worth listening with a keen ear.
Anyone who wants the state pension triple lock to continue will be hoping that the Prime Minister is going to commit to it in full.
Yeah, and he's going to commit to not tinkering with it, as the Times reported this morning, by an estimated 600 million potentially. So have a look to see if Rishi Sunak makes that sterling commitment here.
Mr. Speaker, as someone who spends more money heating their swimming pool than the total value of the UK state pension, I think it's safe to say that the Prime Minister might not be as invested in this topic as some others. But let's afford him the opportunity to clear up any confusion. Will he commit his party, the Conservative Party, to maintaining the state pension triple lock beyond the next general election? Yes or no?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this is the party that introduced the triple lock, Mr. Speaker. This is the party that has delivered a £3,000 increase in the state pension since 2010. It's also the parties that ensure that there are 200,000 fewer pensioners living in poverty today, and this winter ensuring that pensioners get an extra £300 alongside their winter fuel payment to support them through the challenging times with inflation. So, Mr. Speaker, our track record is clear. There is one party in this House that has always stood up for our pensioners, and that is the Conservative Party.
Well, let's have a listen, because I think Stephen Flynn, did he have another go on this?
He has another go on this, yeah.
Well, let's have a listen, see if he has any more success. Notable. He didn't fully commit Rishi Sunak there, so let's have a listen to Stephen Flynn having another go.
I had a yes there, and you'll imagine my shock, my utter surprise that we appear to have consensus once again between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party on this most important of issues, despite the promises that were made to the people of Scotland in 2014, and despite the clear statements from the likes of Gordon Brown that the only way to protect your pension is to remain within the UK. How hollow those words are now. So may I ask the Prime Minister, who does he think will scrap the state pension triple lock first? His government or the Labour Party's government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, thanks to the actions of this government, pensioners in Scotland are receiving record increases in their state pension, £870 this year. Extra support with the cost of living this winter. This is the government that introduced and remains committed to the triple lock. But he does raise a good point, Mr. Speaker. Pensioners in Scotland should know the reason they can rely on the state pension, not just today but for years to come, because of the strength of our union and the strength of our United Kingdom government.
Very notable lack of full-throated commitment.
We sit here listening to what people say. Quite often it's much more important what they don't say. And it would be very strange if he committed to it, because we don't know how much money there's going to be, and it costs an absolute blooming fortune. And
is this a slight exercise in kite flying, do you think, of just keep letting it get out that you might not do it and just gauge the reaction? If there's a huge sort of Theresa May social care style backlash on the doorsteps, then you might step back from it.
And you say you were always committed to it.
You're always committed to it. But
and then you get a win for doing what you were always doing.
Yeah, and I think there are two separate issues here, because there's the issue about what happens in response to the news about wage growth yesterday and what to do in the immediate term about the fact that they might not want to raise the state pension by as much as would be expected. And then there's the issue about whether or not you recommit to it in a manifesto, right? And those are two things that I think are being kind of willfully lumped together to create a sense of ambiguity. It was interesting listening to Flynn there, because of course he singled out Labour as well on this, and I think given recent polling showing that Labour's making a really significant comeback up north of the border, it's unsurprising that he keeps going on this, and this is something we're seeing more and more in PMQs, that he wants to paint the Conservative Party with the same brush as the Labour Party, because both he sees as a threat to them.
And actually, using his two questions to sort of lump them together and attack Starmer as much as Sunak is not evidence of that. Well, that's probably quite enough, Stephen Flynn. What else have you got for us?
I'm afraid it's not quite enough pensions triple lock. So we're going to go now to Ashley Dalton, a Labour MP, a pretty new Labour MP, who of course took over from Rosie Cooper, and she is making a similar point around the triple lock, which is ever so slightly confusing, given that actually, and you'll hear Rishi Sunak say this, there is some ambiguity around the Labour position on that too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his answer to the Honourable Member for Aberdeen South, but I'm still confused on this matter because just yesterday the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions said that the pensions triple lock is not sustainable. The Chancellor's economic advisers have suggested that it is time to review the policy, but Number 10, when questioned, have said they're committed to it. So, Mr. Speaker, which is it?
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to the triple lock. It was this government that introduced the triple lock. She might want to have a word with her own deputy leader, who I don't think provided much clarity on the matter. And remember, Mr. Speaker, I think we all remember when it came to pensions, what we can remember is Gordon Brown's 75p a week increase.
Oh, that's one from the archives. Tim, when was that?
Yeah, it was a while ago. I remember the Daily Mail put a picture of a packet of peanuts on their front page, which cost 75p. Yeah,
that was sort of why the Tory party got no, 1999.
And at the risk of trivialising, the people with the string on Suella Braverman's head are now pulling it side to side, and she's shaking her head. She's shaking her head at the appalling behaviour of Gordon Brown.
Whereas Mel Stride, the Working Pensions Secretary, who's been talking about the pension triple lock, is trying to look incredibly serious while wearing an enormous sheaf of wheat on his jacket. Interested in that question coming from a Labour MP, given that the Labour Party is very reluctant to commit to this either.
Yeah, and this is likely, if the polls are to be believed, to actually be more of a problem for the Labour Party than it would for others. I saw a former cabinet minister earlier who just said, "I don't know why we don't just commit to it outright, because they think they're going to win, they're going to lose the election, and just obviously create a very big early headache for the Labour Party in doing so." So I'm not sure that was a massively well-advised question, though maybe she knows something that we don't.
Well, and frankly, there are more Tory votes. Traditionally speaking, pensioners vote Conservative, and it's more important for the Tory party to shore that up ahead of an election, whereas Labour doesn't get nearly so many pensioners. So they can afford to sort of say to everybody else, why should we give all this money to pensioners?
Well, where are we going next?
We're going away from the state pension, you might be pleased to hear, and towards Luton Airport.
I don't think anyone's ever happy to go towards Luton Airport.
Well, increasing numbers probably will be, according to Daisy Cooper, who asked this question about the expansion of Luton, which you might think sounds boring, but actually I think...
No, don't introduce it like that. You've got to say it's really exciting. It's Daisy Cooper, who's the Deputy Leader of the Lib Dems, talking about Luton Airport.
She's talking about it, and she is giving Rishi Sunak an opportunity to clarify his position on net zero. So take a listen to this.
Great.
Luton Airport is trying to massively expand its airport capacity from 18 million passengers per year to a whopping 32 million passengers per year. This will blight the lives of thousands of residents across Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, and especially in North St Albans, who live under the flight path, but it will also fly in the face of the advice from the government's own climate advisors. It's been reported that the Prime Minister is getting ready to ignore his climate advisors. Is that true?
Prime Minister. No, Mr. Speaker, but what I would say is my approach to getting to net zero is not one that requires people to give up doing the things that they want to do and enjoying, like flying. The right thing to be doing is, as we are, investing in new technologies and funding them, things like sustainable aviation fuel, because that's how we'll decarbonise aviation on the transition to net zero, not force people to give everything up.
She didn't talk about blighting the lives of the 32 million people who are going to have to travel to Luton Airport every year. Get on that infernal shuttle bus.
I don't think I've ever been to Luton
it's
Airport.
So awful.
Campari, that's what I was thinking of. There's another cultural reference for you you've got to get, Lara. This was a TV ad starring Lorraine Chase, where she said something about Luton Airport.
Yeah, well, there's an episode of One Foot in the Grave called In Luton Airport, No One Can Hear You Scream as well.
There we are. Daisy Cooper wearing an enormous 3-pronged sheaf of wheat.
Do we think it's bigger than everybody else's?
Or maybe it's just
Are
the way
they
it was
free to
arranged.
fashion their own sheafs? Or...
Well, because Jim Shannon was sitting behind her, and he had his stuck in his pocket, with it only peeking out like a handkerchief.
That's sweet.
Yeah. There we are. Are we all done then, Lara?
Yeah, I think. I've got more for you if you want them, but
No,
it really looks like you don't, so we'll stop
I think you've probably peaked with Luton Airport.
I've got this to you.
You will be in people's inboxes at
3 p.m.
3 o'clock with the PMQs Unpacked email. Oh, bit of gossip for you. You can put this in your email. Apparently, there's been a ding-dong between Alan Mack and Rupa Huck in the gallery. My eyes in the gallery say Rupa Huck has brought in her sister. Rupa Huck's a Labour MP. She's brought in her sister, Connie Huck, off of Blue Peter, who is married to Charlie Brooker. And they're all in the gallery, and Alan Mack wouldn't move along the row, and they've had a bit of a ding-dong in the gallery, apparently, so that Charlie Brooker could watch PMQs.
I wonder what they made of it. That will go in the email. Thank you.
Good. Look forward to
what anyone makes of Alan Mack. God bless him. He's a sort of low-level national treasure, isn't he, Alan Mack?
In so many ways. So many ways. We don't have time to explore that. Right, up next, we're going to speak to some farmers and ask, are they impressed by the enormous sheaves of wheat they've been worn by MPs on PMQs? And then we'll do Can You Get to Number 10? That's next. Your Times Radio.
Discover America's great outdoors on an unforgettable trip to the USA, courtesy of Times Radio and Trailfinders. Go to the competitions page of the Times Radio website for your chance to win a USA adventure, handcrafted by travel experts and worth up to £5,000.